people are still coming in, you're not going to want to miss this. It's going to be a great discussion. Yesterday we talked a lot about the ventures itself, the capital required. This is going to be a really great intersection of one of the quotes that we heard from Joey from the bank yesterday, which was entrepreneurship is a type of public service. So I think we'll expand on that with what was it that Tom said about enthusiasm? Unreasonably optimistic is what Tom Davin of Black Rifle Coffee, formerly, said that we could be and should be in our ventures. So we'll hear a little bit about the barriers that these gentlemen are facing and what they've discovered about ways that you can partner across sectors to continue to do good work. So I'll start by asking Arun Gupta, the CEO of Noblereach and author of the book that is available to you in the next room, to introduce himself and tell you about the path, please, where you are now. And then we will hear from CIO, CTO, Nand, Mulchandani, about the same thing. How did you get to where you are, and what does it mean to sit where you are? And then we'll dive into some topics where I expect some great questions. We'll pause halfway through for some of those, and again at the end. So Arun, may we start with you, please?
Arun Gupta. So I grew up in the Washington, D.C. area. My parents immigrated from India. Spent 45 years in D.C. My father works at Naval Sea System Command, so government's been in our family. He's still working there. God bless his soul. So he still goes in and works there, and so government and what this represents is personal for me. I then was a VC for 20 years. I was at Carlyle, but then most of my career was at Columbia Capital, which, for many of you may know, was founded by Senator Warner. And you started to see the intersection between mission tech and entrepreneurship during that period. The latter half of my time there, first half of my time at Columbia was really investing in your standard venture deals. Go big, go home, valley kind of opportunities. And the latter half was looking more at things that were related to mission. And this is the early days of cybersecurity in 09 and 10, GovTech and opportunities like that. Was invested with Nate Fick, who's now our ambassador of technology on a company called Endgame. And when you get involved in that community, what you saw firsthand was both the challenges of how entrepreneurs interact with government, but also the magic when it works. And when you could draw that innovation and bring it to the scale of government and really proliferate that, whether it be for national security and other mission-oriented activities. After I retired, I started teaching at Georgetown and Stanford, and then at Stanford I was teaching a class called Valley Meets Mission. I was doing it in Washington, so I was having a class with Stanford students, talking to them about, don't waste your entrepreneurial energy and platform on Candy Crush 3.0, right? We have bigger problems to go solve, and frankly, with your platform and talent, you almost have a responsibility to kind of put it to work against those. But it was also trying to dispel the myth that to do good work means you have to do it, that you can't do it in a for-profit way. These are for-profit ventures that people are creating, and it's okay to make money doing that. And what I realized when I would talk to these students is that, we've almost given them a generational artificial vernacular of a binary choice, for-profit, not-for-profit, private sector, public sector. One's about making money and the one's about doing good. We don't have a language around this middle ground where you can do something mission-oriented and make money in the process. And I would see these kids when we would bring in folks, former CIA director, someone like a Mike Morrell, come in and speak. And he would say what he loved about the class is 40% of the students he felt hated government, the other 40% hated entrepreneurial capitalism, and then we were trying to land the plane by the end of the course that you needed both if you're going to solve big problems. And ultimately, we got there, and we got there because these students had an opportunity to not take things in a very binary fashion, but unpack, what their biases are. What does it really mean to be government? How do you humanize government? And what does it mean to be an entrepreneur, and how do you personalize that? And that was the inspiration then in thinking about writing the book, and seeing this over 3 or 4 years, and also watching. I started teaching the class pre-COVID, but post-COVID, post-Ukraine, with the existential threat of what's going on with climate, security, you look at great power competition. My belief is that this generation cares more than previous generations do about doing mission-oriented work. We have a stat in the book that says 7% of tech workers in government are under the age of 30. We have 4 times as many over the age of 60. the conclusion you could have one of two conclusions. Either this generation doesn't care, or you can say this generation cares, but the infrastructure to connect them to these opportunities is outdated. We're at Noblereach, which is now a foundation we have a $500 million endowment that we've raised to kind of go do some of the work that we talk about in the book, is around how do we get better talent and better innovation into government. And we can talk more about it, but we're launching a Teach for America kind of scholars program where we take top tech students from universities, undergrad and graduates, have them do 1 or 2 year rotations in government and placements. And the idea is to scale that and put this back in the ethos where going into government is something that is viewed as a great place to start your career. So that's what we're doing today. We'll get back, I'm sure, on some of these issues, and I'll pass it on to Nand.
Hello, everyone. Nand Mulchandani. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at CIA. It's a new position. I guess a 76-year-old spy agency eventually would have a CTO. And Director Burns coming on board, I think, made technology, this unstoppable force, a top priority. So the CTO role actually reports directly to the director, which is actually very unusual across government. When you look at the other intel organizations and government organizations don't have a CTO actually at that level. It's because the importance of tech, especially to the agency, and I think government-wide is now widely recognized. I had kind of a parallel life to Arun, but on this coast. My parents are also immigrants from India. My dad actually was part of the semiconductor industry early on. I actually just found his employee badge from Fairchild Semiconductor, which is literally the OG of semiconductor industry. I was born in Mountain View, of all places, El Camino Hospital. And, spent my early life here in California, spent time in India, and then came back for college here. Moved back to the Valley in 1991 because all I wanted to do was startups, to follow in the footsteps of my dad and parents, what they did. Had a 25-year career here in the Valley, built and sold 4 companies in the enterprise infrastructure and security space. Sold one, the first company was acquired by Oracle, second company was acquired by VMware, where I started up the security products group. OpenDNS, I joined as CEO. We sold that company to Cisco. And then a company that I spun out of Excel Partners called Scale Extreme that we was acquired by Citrix. And after doing 4 in a row, it became a, what else is there to do in life? And I had always thought that I wanted to, indulge in public service. I mean, part of it is being part of, an immigrant family to this country. When you look back at the system that we have created in this country, in our country, to enable the types of things that I was able to do, in all honesty, you look around the world and the conditions for doing that are just right here. Now, it could be, I'm biased or we're all biased because we're here and we're the best. But there is truly something special and spectacular about what our society has created in terms of the risk-taking, the ability for people to, the system that we've created and the trust and the conditions are just perfect. And I was a beneficiary of that. And part of it, though, is that the system itself, in my mind, needs investment because these things just don't perpetuate and stay normal over time. You have to invest in the system to keep it healthy, to keep it ripe, et cetera. And for me, public service was kind of the way of giving back in some sense. I don't know, many of you, obviously veterans, have done incredible work in terms of skill sets that you've brought to the table. I don't know if I can do push-ups anymore to be able to give that level of intensity and give back. So I had a skill set that...
Any more implies that you could have at one point.
All right, let's go out there. No, but it is great now at this time and place where a skill set that I had, or a set of skills that are actually useful to the government and to the military and to the intel services, was actually a real interesting, it was a great opening. And it has truly been. So I've been in government now 4.5 years, did a huge pivot. I'd never stepped foot in the Pentagon till I met General Jack Shanahan at the Jake. 30 minutes later, we had decided that I was going to join. No security clearance, didn't know my way around the Pentagon. Had never set foot at CIA until my final interview with Director Burns. And so it's one of these things, is new experiences, other things there. So it's been quite a journey, and hopefully we'll explore some of that here. But it's funny, but 4.5 years in, it feels like, you know, this is part of my family now. I'm actually joined a new family. I'm kind of a dual citizen in some sense, because part of my job is to be literally that interface and bridge between these two very, very strong and deep cultures, the tech culture, Silicon Valley, entrepreneurship, companies, industry, venture capital, et cetera, and then the amazing world of government and military and intel. So it's been quite a ride.
I love the dual citizenship. That's a great way to frame this. Are there any of you who have also served in public service, not in uniform? Anybody been a Fed? I'm the only one? That can't be. Okay, so this, I'm going to ask Arun next on why did he write Venture Meets Mission, and I am so lucky that I was preparing for this, and that was my discovery of your work, and we've had a brief discussion on this yesterday to just really see how we aren't that far apart. It does feel like dual citizenship unless you have the right ways to make a connection, and you started to explore those, illuminate them. Could you tell us why did you write the book, and what do you hope that comes from it?
Yes, thanks, Barb. You know, the impetus of the book was really based on the class I was teaching and the observations I was seeing with these students. And a real sense that, you know, these students, when presented with the opportunity to actually think about what their biases are and unpack them and do it in the form of storytelling. It's not telling them that you shouldn't feel this way. It's putting people in front of them that they can then engage with and have these conversations with it, help them unpack these biases, was really powerful. And what you realized is that in our academic institutions, it's not happening, right? If you're an engineering school or a business school, there aren't faculty that have spent time in government that are going to be encouraging these students to kind of go do something alongside or in collaborating in that capacity. And if you're on the other side, you know, there are many times not exposing you to what you could be doing on the entrepreneurial side, and sometimes even using disparaging words like "don't sell out." And so it was a bit of that was the impetus about like watching. You know, my badge of honor, you know, with the class was watching these students rescind their banking and consulting offers, right, and wanting to come into this world, whether it be going to a cyber startup, you know, with a inspirational founder like Nand, or going to Tech Congress, but wanting to give back and do something in a meaningful way. And so that was the real impetus around the book. And honestly, when we started, we didn't know what it would become, whether we would even get to the point of a book, but it was collecting those observations that we had. So one audience was really students, young professionals, and really trying to inspire them that, like, and I've got 2 kids in college, and I say to them, but also my students, like, if there was a place I would be investing my next, you know, decade or 2, it would be in this intersection of mission, tech, and entrepreneurship. Because there's so many big problems to solve, and the ability to mobilize capital to go solve these problems has never been greater. You know, Nand could tell you, but like, you know, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, if you wanted to start a company in this space, that capital was hard to come by. Now, if you've got the right team and the right idea, you can mobilize capital in a really material way. And that's an important piece, because the government can still be a long journey of how you collaborate. So that was one. The other audience we're really trying to inspire and talk about was share examples of entrepreneurs that are doing this well. And again, a lot of the idea that we wanted to write with was, one, a sense of optimism, but 2, show through storytelling that people are already doing this. So not really get into a debate about what we should do or what we shouldn't do, but share observations of what the great work is that people are doing, and then start posing the question of, like, how do we do more of it, and how do we make this the norm, you know, not the exception. And as you heard from Kevin Mandia, like, we as a country are amazing when our back's up against the wall, right? We do amazing things. The question is then, how do we make that the norm and keep that cadence and that muscle memory going? You know, and And we've actually done a number of great things where government and entrepreneurs have collaborated and solved big problems. People forget that so much of SpaceX was government funding, right? You look at what we did with Moderna and with Operation Warp Speed. That was, entrepreneurs coming to the table with government to come and solving a big problem. And now you're starting to see this floodgate open up. So that was the other audience that we were writing towards. And then the third was really folks on the government side, about their place and how it's important for them to be engaging with the venture community and how the venture community thinks and how entrepreneurs think. Because our overarching thesis in this is that, and Nand hit on it, like, I feel the same gratitude for this country, for my family and what we've been able to do. When I look at the strategic differentiators of this country that are still orders of magnitude better than anywhere else in the world, it's our ability to create talent, if you look at our higher ed system, and it's our ability to innovate and create companies through our entrepreneurial ecosystem. There's no place else in the world that's even close. And the evidence of that is that everyone from the world comes here to do both. Right? It's a free market. People can go wherever they want. They're coming here. And the question for us is that's our strategic differentiator. How do we then build the pathways to connect those two around government ambitions? Because there's a role for government, right? And it's an important role because that's how we're going to scale and reach to be able to solve climate and cyber, national security and healthcare and food. And the level of innovation and velocity of innovation that's happening today, the people that are best equipped for that are actually entrepreneurs. Because entrepreneurs are trained with the mindset of like build a plane while they're flying it, right? And that's the world we're going to be living in now going forward. And so it's important to think about how do we marshal the energy of the entrepreneurial spirit that this country has that's so unique if we're going to solve these big problems.
And I'm going to turn it over to Nand in a second. You also, Nand, I want you to talk about that it is a choice. It is not, government service is not the option of last resort. Like some of us might have felt that we were perceived that way for choosing a life in uniform. What else could you not do that was your choice? So I'd love to hear more about that. And then having you knew what you wanted to be able to do as an entrepreneur. What's your experience at this Venture Meets Mission that's keeping you from, or is you're enabling, because you said you're the most outgoing person at the CIA, probably, most spontaneous.
Most overt.
The most overt, that was the right word. And then there are people like Ben, I'm gonna put you on the spot, who's trying to make those tweaks in government that make the pathway possible, because the boring stuff like regulation will stop us. So I'll start with a few thoughts and pitch it to you.
Yeah, well, actually, it is indeed the boring stuff and the plumbing stuff that I think is actually the one of the major inhibiting factors. Now, the dynamics of each market, when you think of sector by sector, the telco market, the healthcare market, the government market, the enterprise software market, et cetera, each of these markets is configured very differently with the buyers and sellers and the configuration of them, the form of capital, the size of capital, the maturity of capital, et cetera. So matching all that together is incredibly important. So the dynamics of operating the startup community and the venture community leaning into government and government leaning into that is specifically dictated by what we would call monopsony buyer sort of dynamics, which is buyer of one, as opposed to monopoly. This is a monopsony, where buyer of one markets are configured in a very, very weird way. On top of it, it's not just a buyer of one, but it's government buyer of one. In our case, it's a spy agency buyer of one, right? And so when you compound those problems, you end up with an absolute disaster of friction across the entire pipeline. And then this sort of venture meets mission piece, in my mind, and the book is very timely and this discussion is very timely, it's because it's, in my mind, still an experiment. This is not a done deal. When you talk to VCs who are investing in next generation defense tech, everybody's leaning in right now, and we in government are trying to lean in a big way too. At CIA, I'd say, a lot of the work that I'm focused on right now is getting this pipe cleaned up so we can actually be, and we are, and I publicly say this, we're a really bad customer. We're a shitty customer. We write really bad opaque requirements that's all in jargon. We don't try to disclose everything to the buyers for obvious reasons sometimes, and sometimes not. Then, on top of it, acquisition procurement, which is incredibly complicated. Then on top of it, we don't create and leverage the dynamics of knowing how to deal with the startup versus a large company. We confuse IT with special tech. It's a super, super confusing thing. And getting that right, though, to me is priority number one. Because, I lived through at the DoD the whole Project Maven. In some sense, people view that as the seminal sort of negative thing that happened between Washington and Silicon Valley. Now, on both sides, I think there was a complete impedance mismatch and a communication mismatch. And I think we dramatically overlooked how culturally far apart and knowledge-wise far apart between the two sort of coasts.
You spent, for those who might not be familiar with the project.
Project Maven.
Would you give it, a little background?
So Project Maven was kind of the first large-scale AI project at the DoD, effectively doing object detection in real-time video coming off of drones and UAVs. And, General Shanahan was sort of the instigator of this. He led the project. And Google, among other performers, was one of the companies that was providing these AI algorithms to do this work. And in sort of a crazy sort of revolt, many of the Google employees basically, effectively didn't want to work on the project, and then Google effectively pulled out of the project. And it was, widely discussed as, Washington and Silicon Valley hate each other, and this whole sort of thing, experiment or anything, is a complete disaster and it's not going to work out. Now, we spent a huge amount of time repairing that relationship, which, by the way, so on both sides, actually, in my mind, just looking at it, from sort of a meta standpoint, Silicon Valley, the culture and the sort of roots of this, of the valley itself, were very much built around sort of a counterculture movement, right? Is the idea that we're going to be out here doing our stuff, we're self-contained, things happen. And two big things kind of were there. Number one is having been in part of this sort of evolution of the valley over the past 30 years. So Sequoia Capital used to have this thing, it was attributed to them, where they would not look at deals that were 40 miles away outside of the Menlo Park radius. Why? Because that's pretty much the limit to where I can drive to go to a board meeting, and nothing interesting is happening outside of that 40-mile radius, right? So we're in our bubble. It literally was a bubble. We were in our self-contained bubble. And we built computer systems that we threw it over the wire, and people used it for all kinds of crazy shit, but that was their problem. They were doing stuff. Now, over the past 30 years in Silicon Valley now, we don't actually produce computers anymore. Like, I'm a compiler guy by training. We don't write compilers here anymore. We don't build operating systems. We don't build hardware. We don't actually build computer systems. We now basically sell ads. So this is not Silicon Valley. It's Ad Valley, or whatever you want to call it. Now, the idea that Silicon Valley companies, so when they haul up CEOs to Congress and have them testify, the idea that Silicon Valley companies, tech companies, actually influence elections and influence nation states and stuff is actually mind-blowing to people still here, that we haven't that level of impact. I think people are coming to grips with it because of consumer electronics and other pieces. Now, on the other hand, on the defense side, we need to procure and buy stuff a certain way, and we just don't understand why the companies can't figure it out. And I think this gap is still very, very wide. It's still an experiment. And I actually don't feel there are enough people. Like, when I look around in D.C., when I fly out to D.C., by the way, my family's still here. I fly out to D.C. every year. I've done this for 4.5 years now. There aren't enough people out there in D.C. who are dual citizens, or here who are dual citizens at that core, which is why, books like yours and highlighting the work that you're doing, and all of you, I mean, this is in a way a weird, interesting intersection, right? Military vets in San Francisco talking about tech, not entirely new, but still relatively new. And this is a very, very select, sort of venue and people.
Just to follow up on Nand's point, because I do love the metaphor of dual citizenship, but if you unpack that of what's the power of being a dual citizen, it's that you have trust with both both the places that you have citizenship, and that's what's lacking. So when Nand says that there's not enough of folks out there, it really is to address the trust problem, right? It's enough folks that know how to speak both languages. How do you have a shared vernacular? There's enough people that understand both cultures, the idiosyncrasies of both cultures, right? And then people that have trust in both communities. All those three things are incredibly important, right? And that's why I think this community plays a really important role, because you actually have that, right? You've been in on the military side. You're able to speak to the needs, the culture, the way people are thinking. And now, as you come in on the venture side, whether it be startups or investing, you're understanding how that game works. And just that piece of it is incredibly important if we're going to make venture and mission become a bigger movement, frankly, across the country, right? We need more of these kinds of change makers out there and sharing your stories. Like one of the things that we've been talking about even as well is, we do a lot of storytelling in the book about great examples. And I had someone at the Navy share this about how people were talking about this on a Slack channel inside the Pentagon. And I'm like, well, what's going on? Like, what's creating this enthusiasm? And he's like, look, I think for the first time people feel seen for the great work they're doing. Now with Noblereach, you have the opportunity to make them feel heard. Like, how do we collect more of these stories? Like, they shouldn't be like corner case stories. Like, they should be out there, right? And this is part of the issue. Like, the negative stories get out there, like, this didn't work, Maven, whatever, right? But we don't tell for every one of those, I guarantee there's 10 to 100 really great stories that go overlooked, right? And these aren't not being told because they're not classified or, there's plenty of unclassified stuff that can be shared. We just don't have a platform to do it, right? And so we think this is another important piece that, this community can play an important role in that.
And just one point on the Maven point, which is that actually got turned around, right, in a big way, and that's very much of a singular story. The brilliant news is that, I actually, inside, I've been briefing kind of like what's the climate like for this stuff at the agency. We do not have a single company that we have tried to talk to or want to work with who has said no. I mean, the environment, I don't know if it's the environment, the global environment that's there, but this idea that the two coasts don't want to work together or other things, that's long gone. That's years gone. Now the question is not about the willingness, it's about the ability to scale it. That's the question of the day. And I'll give everybody full credit, right? It's credit on the Valley side, which is tech companies wanting to work, people wanting to engage, everybody wanting to lean in. And on the government side, in as much as, on the government side, we're slow, we're big, we're bulky, everybody's leaning in. Congress is leaning in, senior leadership at every organization that you talk to, this idea of innovation and leaning in is in the air, and people are trying their darndest. It's not that, government doesn't want to do this. We desperately want to do this. And the question now, like, I have a project going on right inside, and literally it's not about the supply side of the problem. It's really cleaning up the demand side. And, we're going to hopefully roll out stuff over the next couple of months that hopefully dramatically changes CIA's way of dealing with this. So I'm really hopeful and positive about where things are going.
Wish you could say more, but I imagine you cannot. So
Yeah,
we'll
I'm not
try.
supposed to be making news here, yeah.
No, I know. Okay, well, perhaps your questions can guide us somewhere shortly. We'll see what happens. But we won't push too hard. If I could, because you said everybody's leaning in, okay, but how's the connection happening? Arun, if you could talk about how can we begin to cultivate, even introduce ourselves and get to that shared work?
Yeah, so I think, we talk about it as we need to rebuild the infrastructure a bit. Talent infrastructure to get better talent that kind of has a dual citizenship kind of model where you can go into government and come back out and be in the private sector, and likewise on the innovation side. So start with, and Kevin mentioned this, there are a few organizations that have been around, like In-Q-Tel, which I think is probably the gold standard of engaging with the venture community right now in government that we can look at as models for other places to kind of replicate. Now, a big I think confusion many times is that people assume on the government side that what the venture capitalists or the ventures need is capital. We're not looking for investment, right? And so the earlier conversation of a strategic investment fund, is not as the need isn't for that. It's for contracts, right? If you're a startup, many of you are, you're a founder, you're not going to the government saying, hey, can I get 500 grand or can I get $1 million? You're saying, can I get a $2 million contract? And then I can go raise the money. There's plenty of money out there, right? And so I think the way we kind of create these partnerships, someone was sharing with me an example at Space Force, where what they do now is on Thursdays, they put out task orders saying we need XYZ kind of information, data, whatever it may be. And by Sunday, they're selecting someone. And by Tuesday, cash is out the door. Like, that's a different way to be engaging with a venture company. Because you can now decide and have visibility, do I want to bid on this or not? And you know what the timeline's going to be. And, we talk about it in the book. The rolling 6 months is what kills a venture company, right? Having clarity around that is what we need. The other piece, I think, back to your sense of engagement is, look, not to being humble, but like folks like Nand coming into government is important, right? Because they serve as that trust and they serve as that bridge. And I think the other piece, and this is why I'm also very optimistic, is that we're starting to see a generational refresh of these decision makers, where the folks that were making the procurement decisions are now looking like they were 45 to 55, right? And they've been shaped differently as far as how you engage in technology and entrepreneurs and innovation in a very material way. And you're seeing that happen now in the DoD. You're starting to see that if you look at what's happening in commerce, and what they're doing with the CHIPS Act. You look at what Jigar Shah's doing over in Department of Energy in the LPO program. They're looking and leaning in a very innovative way. And I think that's a generational piece to it.
So I wanted to add, Arun hit actually something really, really important is for government to understand the dynamics of early stage venture versus scaled IT and technology, two very different things. We have viewed buying stuff, which is the way we buy pencils is the way we buy technology, and the way we buy try to deal with startup technology is we deal with scaled IT the same way. So bringing nuance to this game, in some sense, is incredibly important. So for instance, at CIA, we're going to try to build a model now where you have to match, and Arun hit a great point. The one lever that we have at government is buying power, right? It's that is the cash is the lever, the customer. Now, how we wield it, and CIA, by the way, is a different scale than DoD. DoD is the ultimate, right? $820 billion worth of buying power that needs to be wielded very, very carefully and very smart. And the idea that, in some sense, on the early stage side, we want to match the series investing model that basically works incredibly well. And the series investing model is not about individually choosing winners or losers. It's about creating an environment where the competitive juices of tens or hundreds of companies all compete to be the ultimate winner that ends up scaling and then delivering at the end. So we have to appropriately match POs and purchase orders with the size of company, and also bringing diversity to that game, as opposed to when we're buying. So for instance, in very mature areas of for instance, enterprise-wide buying decisions, you can't bet on a startup individually because you're making a singular bet, right? I call this and jokingly, right, the venture market in some sense operates with its, 1,000 or 1,000,000 monkeys at typewriters, right? Each typing away, and, the adage goes that you don't know, one monkey out of, over a period of time will crank out Shakespeare. Now, the point is this. Statistically that one monkey will generate Shakespeare. you don't know which exact monkey will generate that. So you can't place a bet. You can place a bet on the aggregate. You can't place a bet on the specific. And so understanding those dynamics and leaning into those and harnessing that versus making enterprise-wide mature decisions on technology, we're now working with procurement, we're working with product teams, we're working with buyers inside to start developing that understanding at a dramatic level inside government. So we're now starting to understand the language and impedance match with how the market works.
And to Nand's point, in the book, we talk about how the idea of public-private partnerships is somewhat outdated, or it doesn't really apply to this venture world in the way we think about it, right? Because implicit in public-private partnerships is big company partnering with government. So again, if a contract is moved off for 6 months or a year and you ask to scale up, no harm, no foul, you keep doing what you're doing, right? As a venture, you could be dead. It could be over, right? Because you've now ramped up burn, thinking you're about to win a big contract. That contract doesn't come through. You've burned more capital, and your VCs, right, start to lose credibility in the team, right? And so there's all these other implications that we try to touch on. And so how you engage in that is incredibly important as well if you're going to bring this ecosystem and the innovation into the scale and reach of what government can provide.
One last piece to add there. This is why, for instance, we build a lot of tech inside, and rightly so. Which is, as I say, there's no app store for spy software, unfortunately. But there's a lot of stuff that we actually should not be building. We should be buying from the outside. But the problem is, again, it gets down to the dynamics. When I tell teams internally, which is the ability and probability that our internal development of an application or system is going to be the winning product that we're going to build. We have a when you look at the numbers, the probabilities adjusted sort of outcome, the chances that we're going to have the best, user design, we're going to have the best architecture, we're going to, without a competitive market, the ability for our singular team to be the best product that we can deliver to our end users is 1 out of 10,000 or 1 out of 40,000, because those are the numbers that startups have on the other end who are building it, right? And so the build equation simply doesn't work. Now, on the flip side, by extension, I also believe the public-private partnership that we talk about within competitive markets like China and other places, where when they call about civil military fusion, et cetera, that to me just doesn't make any rational sense from a probability perspective, which is the government choosing the one company that is going to be the winner in a particular area is nonsense. So in some sense, I still love our system. Our system, I think, is awesome. The question becomes is how do we actually make this work within the constraints of our system, as opposed to thinking that there's another model that works better in some sense.
Getting agitated now, thinking of the times as a program person when we think, yes, so short-sighted to think that you have the ability to do it, first of all, and second, that you even know that that's how to solve the problem. I think we I'm thinking of contracting now, and how the government tries to write the requirements for it and box you in to something that is not even a good solution. So,
Barb, it's a great comment, because when you think about it, like, what government should be focused on are the outcomes that they're looking for.
Exactly.
You write procurements based on the inputs that you want. And if you focus on just here are the outcomes we're looking for, and look, SpaceX is a good example of that. Again, what we did with Moderna and Operational Warp Speed is a good example. These are the outcomes we're looking for. If you can achieve these outcomes at certain price points, X amount will be available as, of capital to get to the next stage. And that's how you stage it in. And it's all, again, it's not investment going into the company. These are contracts, right? And that's the purchasing power that's valuable to the venture community. And shifting that model to outcomes becomes very powerful, right? And, I joke around that if, as a VC, if I was measured like government, I'd never raise another fund, right? Because as a VC, I can make 10 bets, and, 7 of them may not work out. 3 of them are home runs, and I'm oversubscribed, right? In government, I can make 9 bets or 10 bets, and if 9 of them are okay, but 1 of them's cylinder, I'm carrying that around with me, right? And we've also got to, as a society, think about, like, if we want government to innovate, we have to give them the agency to be able to make mistakes, right, and fail. A colleague of mine, or a good friend, Dan Tangerlini, who we quote in the book, talks about how, in these two systems, and Mariano Mazzucato writes about this, which is, we socialize risk with government and we privatize the upside in the private sector. And he talks about how if you look at the government, each agency has an IG, an inspector general. What's their job? Their job is to make sure you stick to the playbook, right? It's not about like, hey, what are the outcomes? It's making sure that you're sticking to the inputs. And if you stray off the inputs, you're at risk of maybe having to come in front of a congressional hearing and things of that sort. And so he posits the solution to that is to have two IGs. And you're kind of going like, what? The second IG would be an innovation general, right? So if every agency had an innovation general, and their job is to make sure if the agency isn't innovating fast enough, you could also get put in front of a congressional hearing. The point being is that we need that tension. If all we're doing is always looking at mistakes and downside, you're going to create an institution that's going to be risk averse.
So I'll extend. I just wanted to add one nuance to Arun, your point. He's absolutely right on. The only thing I'd add is the problem of premature scaling, which, by the way, for startups is, when I go and look at kind of my all the bad things that I've done in startup, all the bad decisions that I made in startups, like I would say, premature scaling is kind of one of those simple, right out the gate, bad things that I've done in my career, and is a killer for startups. We do have the same problem on the government side. I had a friend a DOD, unnamed classmate, who went to DOD, and she was working through some budgets and everything, and I think she got told by her boss to stop putting projects that were under $100 million on the spreadsheet because it was taking the generals too long to scroll through the spreadsheet. And the idea that a $100 million project, in the grand scheme of things, $800 billion budget, is definitely small. But in the venture community, $100 million is like, oh my God, that's a fund. So it's one of these things where playing around with these small toys, the problem is that the funding was never matched there. So the point is, when you lose $1 billion on an idea or something that was not scaled yet, of course the IG should get involved. That's like a dumb decision because you put $1 billion into something that really was an idea. And the point is I think because people don't even get out of their pajamas in Washington until something's $1 billion, right? That becomes a unit of currency and it becomes something that people throw around. But in the Valley, if somebody said $1 billion, like that's still a lot of money. Of course, Series A and seeds have gone. My first raise back in 1996 was $3.1 million Series A. And, I have friends now that are raising $15 million pre-seeds, which is crazy. But it's still not $1 billion. So the idea is that matching the maturity of the project with the amount that it's okay to lose. So the idea that if you're putting in a couple of $1 million across a couple of different companies and you lose it, the innovation general, I love this idea of the innovator general, needs to come in and say, that's okay because you spread it around, you took 15 bets, one played out, and you lost money on 14. That's the game. It was designed that way. And you as a manager were okay taking this bet because you played it the right way. You didn't put $1 billion into a single company out of 20 possibilities and then lost the money. Well, that's Vegas. And you should be then. So this type of thinking and enabling middle management in government and creating the culture and conditions to work that on the customer side has to happen. We have to have that change in culture, in teaching, and other pieces there.
In case it sounds complex and challenging, could you, Arun, and you've had experience too, Nand, talk about the balance of the profit motive to doing this good work? Like, are you going to lose money trying to do this? What would you say?
Yeah, so, I get asked this question, quite a bit, like, how do you choose between mission and profit? And I think the answer to that is that we're now in a place where if you build your company from the beginning up, you integrate them together, right? So your business model is the more mission I am doing, the more profit I am making. Where it becomes an issue is when people are searching for profit and then later on trying to attach mission on the side. And then they're trying to figure out like where this is a subsidy program and where's my money going. And I think this was the powerful insight for a lot of my students when I would bring in, CEOs of venture-backed companies that were playing in the mission space, cyber companies, climate tech companies, food tech companies, et cetera, is that when they talked to the entrepreneurs, they were always trying to solve, they were focused on the mission, and they were focused then on building a business model to support the mission. And then the more that business model scaled and was successful, that's how they created profit, right? And that's how they created value. And that's how they became billion-dollar companies. And so I think what's important is it shouldn't be a choice. It should be part of your business, right? And I think that's the opportunity that this group has in the kinds of things that you're investing in the kinds of businesses that you're looking to build, is that from the ground up, it's a mission-oriented company, and you can solve these social problems, in that process.
I'd love it if you start thinking about the questions you've got. I'm going to ask Nand one more. So if you have some, please get to a microphone. Could you tell us a bit, we obviously need this partnership to solve some of the nation's largest national security issues. If you could tell us either, I don't want to take you out of your lane too much, but what is one of the problems that you are looking to solve where you see this potential partnership being really essential on the horizon? Or are there the market in total? Is there a sector problem set? I don't know how to frame it exactly, but what are you seeing as the opportunity that you could comment on?
Yeah, so that's a little bit of a tough question to answer in a public forum, but here's how I'll try to. So, and I'll get specific about CIA in terms of so the range of tech that we deal with as this agency is insanely wide. It's unlike anything that at least I've experienced before. It's because the range of the mission all the way, I jokingly call it from shoe phones to internet scale software and everything in between. It is hard tech, inelastic, all the way to all the stuff that you would see at a bank in terms of data processing and ingest and other pieces, because the mission set is so weird. So as CTOs, sort of thinking through how we. The other thing is that culturally and mission-wise, as a spy agency, there's this weird juxtaposition of tradecraft and everything being very focused on low signal, very underground, very bespoke, very singular, while simultaneously the tech community, what we have changed over the past decades is the issue of scale. And scale and bespoke and low and slow are completely diametrically opposite. So how do you actually harness the benefits and cost and security structures of scale while adding it to mission that in some cases is very bespoke and other things, is actually the tension that we're dealing with. So whenever I drop the word scale at a meeting inside, at least a year and a half ago, it would freak everybody out. Because scale imputes signal, and signal is something that everyone's taught to worry about. Now, the weird part, though, is that how the tech world has changed and the environment has changed. And the joke that I have is, right, what we teach our tip of the spear, the case officers, is find a rock, hide under the rock, and don't have two of you can't share a rock, right? So everybody go find your rock and hide under it. The idea now of hiding under the rock is the signal now. Because anybody who's encountered a CAPTCHA on the internet knows that anything that doesn't look right is flagged and stopped, and it's getting very sophisticated. And so our ability to operate out in the real world, out in tech world, which is basically the whole world now, is becoming incredibly challenging. So now the strategies that we're having to develop are more aligned with what does the world look like, and how do we actually align not our bespoke stuff, but the mainline stuff with the things that are actually out there and operating at scale. So this is an insanely big cultural challenge that we have to deal with that is happening worldwide, which is where we operate, obviously, outside the United States. These conditions are even more acute in hard target areas. So this is a massive challenge that we're dealing with, in which case we do have to lean into commercial, lean into the Valley, lean into tech, because this is the volume stuff that's deployed in a big way. And the other piece that I'm trying to do is, and this gets down to sort of the point that Arun was making, you were making. From a cost perspective, so when you think of the two most important curves in technology that I like, if I were teaching a class like Arun, right, one of the slides that I would have is sort of the unit volume curves and unit cost curves, right? Those are the two most important things in tech, which is basically declining sort of cost curve as sort of volume goes up. As a customer, as a buy-side customer, forget the fact that we're CIA, I want us to be on the right side of these curves, right? I don't want to be a singular buyer of something, because when you look at the motive of any of you starting companies, let's get down to the basics of what a profitable tech company looks like. It's basically churning out, or actually any company in the world, churning out the same widget over and over and over in incredibly high volumes with lowest marginal cost. Right? That's literally a business. That is defining the fundamentals of business. When you look at, and Arun made this really key point, when you are company X that's targeted at market Y, and you're building this tortilla making machine that's basically driving unit cost down and unit volume up, and then there's this government thing that's over on the side, you've now created a misalignment from a business perspective, right? Where you are targeted at one thing and then you're off on this other thing, which is low unit volume, very bespoke, very custom. That's not sustainable as a business. So this idea of being a custom-focused machine that works off of, built for mission in some sense, you as a startup or as a young company need to be incredibly focused on that particular thing. And this environment that we're in right now enables VCs to invest in companies with the idea that the customer is going to lean in with enough volume and enough unit volume to be able to build this machinery and company that can operate at scale. So dual use or built in one area and moving into the other area, really, really tough to do. I think we're hopefully seeing an environment where one can build a custom mission-oriented company that delivers for these particular use cases at scale. I don't know if that made sense, but I was trying to sort of pull in a really complicated point.
You did, and thanks for letting me ask a question. You made it an elegant and useful, helpful answer. Thank you. We've got a first question, and we've got several. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you. Adrian Bonenberger, Military Media. You mentioned monopsony, and one of the things I've noticed when it comes to, as you were talking about earlier, the Pentagon and the DoD's influence on procurement and how they work with the larger businesses is it really does seem to suppress innovation, not intentionally, but sort of that's how the system works. And I was wondering what the potential was at the state level to kind of bypass that, maybe have smaller companies working with law enforcement or even National Guards under Title 32. Is that a viable way, having sort of 50 incubators, in a sense, below the federal level? Thank you.
I'll take a stab at that, and I think absolutely is the answer. I think there's a lot to do in state and local, but I think the hard part, honestly, is the dollars and the focus. If you're a startup, and it's hard to go after all those different markets, whereas one federal market and having big customers there can be more meaningful and timely. So ultimately, I think those opportunities exist, and we're starting to see more of that happen. But I think those are happening after you've really kind of developed your chops on the federal side, and then you can move down into the state and local markets.
Yeah, I'll add to that. I mean, there are companies. I think OpenGov is one of the companies. I think my CFO, Paul Denton, is involved there. Is a great example of a company that's trying to bring SaaS delivery of things like financials and other things to state and local governments at scale. But the market dynamics in these cases ends up being, right, so when we look at the history of ERP software, for instance, in enterprise, 20 years ago, everybody developed their own HR system because everybody felt they were a special snowflake. and their needs and requirements are so unique that they can't possibly buy something that somebody else bought. But what ended up happening is because of the delivery of SaaS and things happened, where all of a sudden people said, I know I'm special, but I'm not $1 million special, right? And so the cost differential between somebody buying something off the shelf and standardized versus custom ended up being so big that the cost differentials drove that sort of piece down. I think the economies of scale thing, or those dynamics are, I don't know if they're getting everywhere, but we're seeing patterns of, police buying, canonical off the shelf, finance, other things. I mean, these things operate at such, similarities that I'm seeing those economies develop, but nothing like the federal government, sort of the concentrated power. But those patterns are probably emerging slower, but surely.
I like the idea of the lab, too, being able to experiment. We do have another microphone here, so we're going to go back and forth, if you don't mind waiting just one moment. Go ahead.
Good morning, Matt Frenier with Cold Step. Nand, Arun, Barb, thank you very much for your time being allies to the vets in here, and thanks to all the allies that are in here, to the vets, and any other speakers that might be in here. Sincerely appreciated. The World Economic Forum recently captured some of the top concerns for businesses over the next 2 and 10 years. In 2 years, most of them are based on carbon-related, silicon-based, like AI, cyber, but when you look out 10 years, they're more carbon-related and, things to do with weather, climate change, and warming, global warming. My co-partner, or co-founder, and I are currently working on a scalable solution, so I love this stuff about the unit economics and achieving economies of scale. That's what we're working on, to try and bury as much carbon in the soil as rapidly as we can to address this concern. I was curious, Nan, from inside the CIA, while it's not necessarily a spycraft kind of thing, obviously I think most of us, or majority of people, are starting to believe that there's something different about climate. What's going on within the CIA, if you can share? Is there any pressure on the other organizations, as you guys share what you see as threats to the nation to help, address the climate change issues?
Okay, yeah, so the simple and ready-made answer is we actually have a mission center. So we have 11 mission centers at the agency. One of them, which is actually the newest form, China Mission Center, and what we call T2MC, which is Technology and Transnational Mission Center, actually is focused on the intelligence side of the analytic focus on things like climate change. So we have actually world-leading experts in each of these transnational issues that cut across geographies. So climate change is absolutely one of them. Now, CIA is not either a policymaking organization, and neither do we act to change anything, right? Our job is primarily to focus on the analytic function in support to policymakers. So in as much as your startup is really focused on actioning that, two things. One is you should come brief our analysts on all the great stuff that you're doing from a tech perspective, but we neither buy software or technology to change climate, but for certain, that stuff will then make its way to policymakers. But really, obviously, the USG, is all in on those issues. So you'll probably find a lot of buyers and actioners post-policy side. But as the agency's role is really to focus on the analytic function of that.
Just on your question as well, you look at DoD, climate security is a national security issue, right? And it's viewed that way. So that they think about it that way, they talk about it that way. You look at the military services, Navy, for example, is doing a lot around buying solutions that can help reduce carbon footprints for their ships, and maritime side, and or even investing and collaborating with Emerson Collective and other companies around the startup environment. So I think there's a broad base there, actually, that it goes beyond. And then obviously Department of Energy and what they're doing with the LPO program is being very, is leaning in hard on trying to get capital and renewing this partnership with entrepreneurs like yourself.
Thank you.
Great, thanks. I'm Jason Wilbur. I'm the CEO of Arno Labs. We actually got funded through the In-Q-Tel Emerge program, worked with Noblereach over the last year, so we've had a great experience there. We're obviously on the research side, and we have developed a lot of interesting technology over the years. And so, Nand, you made a comment about cleaning up the demand side within the CIA. I was curious if you could highlight kind of the areas you're excited about in the short term, where accelerating that feedback loop between problem statements and kind of companies working on early stage solutions, and how do you kind of feel that feedback loop faster?
Yeah, so I don't want to prematurely announce anything, but other than the fact that this is a huge area of focus, huge area of concern, let me give you a couple of constituent parts that we're trying to fix. Number one is cleaning up on our side, having clarity about our top priorities, and writing them down in plain English, and in many cases, trying to obviously we'll have a classified version and an unclassified version of these requirements that we can hopefully expand out and put out there for VCs and startups to know in kind of a very clean way. So things like having a clear website and understanding of the different innovation pathways into agency, things like In-Q-Tel, Digital Future, CIA Labs, et cetera. We've got a number of them, but from the outside, you'd never know which one to talk to or why or how. So cleaning that up. Number two is things like the procurement process, but also the ATO process. Right now, it's incredibly cumbersome to get certified and other things there. So how do we create leverage in that process where instead of us being a bottleneck, we can push it out to private enterprise to work that out so that we basically use market dynamics to increase the speed and velocity of that stuff. I did a bunch of this work at VMware in terms of how we did security certifications and lockdown and other pieces. Question is, how do we create leverage in that process? And then last but not the least is this point about how do we, in some sense, the way the Valley of Death is discussed in government, to me actually seems like a mistake. The Valley of Death in many cases is a self-inflicted problem where bad requirements meet bad tech or badly funded stuff. The Valley of Death thing should be reconfigured as we should need to create an environment where winners will emerge out of a competitive process, because not every idea is guaranteed to be good and should survive. So we can't guarantee outcomes. We should be guaranteed good process to enable winners to emerge. So we're taking all these dynamics into consideration within existing authorities that we have. We believe there is a path forward for us to open these pathways up in a big way. So we're super excited about what's coming. We'll see how far we get, but it's a process, not an event. So
Thanks.
thanks.
For that. We have 3 people left, and I'm looking at Tim. We have about 5 minutes.
Oh, yikes.
Let's do this question if you all are okay.
You can do the 3?
Yes.
Fantastic.
Great.
Go in here first.
Hey, good morning. My name is Alan Varghese. I'm an active duty Space Force officer embedded on a military fellowship with Moonshots Capital. Part of my charge from Space Systems Command is to embed with the VC firm, understand the ecosystem that tech companies and VC firms go through, and then go back and disrupt the DoD acquisition process. Going off of your point earlier about the government should not pick one winner when we're talking about R&D or S&T programs, are you suggesting that we use appropriated dollars and spread that across multiple performers to see who outperforms? If not, what recommendations are you suggesting?
Yeah, I would be suggesting to spread it across multiple performers based on outcomes, and then let them kind of compete and see who kind of gets to the results you have. In that process, back to the innovation general concept, you will have a couple of those that don't, turn out for you, and that needs to be the accepted, culture in any agency. And look, in chatting with folks over at Space Force, I think you guys have been probably more innovative in how you're thinking about these things, right? And so it's kudos to the agency in the way you're thinking about it. I was talking to General Raymond about some of these ideas, not only on how you engage with innovation, but also talent, right? How you think about pulling talent into the Space Force, and that people can come in for 1 or 2 year rotations. I mean, even what they're doing with, enabling you to kind of go do is amazing, right? we need more of that. And I think you guys and what you're doing is an important model that like we should be helping amplify your story, right? And I would love to chat with you more about it because people need to see that this good work is happening, right? Because it's easy to say like no one can do it, no one's going to think this way, et cetera. There are pockets all across government that's thinking this way, right? But there are pockets. And so if we get enough of those pockets and we amplify those stories, then the question becomes, why aren't we doing this everywhere?
Yeah, I'll add to Arun's. I've heard great things about how Space Force is leading into innovation and the work you're doing in tech, et cetera. So whatever you're doing, like we've also been trying to study that and learn from kind of how that's worked well. So whatever you're doing, like keep it going and scale it. The only suggestion I'd make on the point, again, I'll make a very strong point. As you're experimenting on the front end of the funnel, right, with startups and things like that, the deal you want to be making with the casino is cap your downside risk and open yourself up to unlimited upside, right? That's the game. So as you're making these bets, right, keep your downside risk managed, capped, and appropriately sized to the bet you're making. But set up the game so that every time you're making these bets across 20 different bets, you're going to lose 19 times. But the one time you hit the jackpot, you want to be able to set yourself up for an IPO, right? So that's the mentality that you need to be bringing to the game here is, small bets, and then, cap downside with unlimited upside. That's how the game works.
Thank you.
First off, thank you all y'all for your time. Truly amazing panel. Founder of John DeSanowitz, founder of Promptus Strategy, consult in the tech implementation strategy space. I loved your comment about building trust between dual citizens. How do you leverage that eventually to the organizational level? Especially Intel is doing a lot of secretive work, and then tech has a lot of IP, NDA type dynamics as well.
I'll take a shot at this if I understood your question right. So one of the things that I had to consciously do at both DoD and now at CIA is that coming in as an outsider, you're generally brought in as somebody who is thought about or is positioned as a change agent. Now, the problem is, and I don't know if this is a study in large-scale organizational change, but in these roles, in these organizations, you cannot always be the perpetual outsider. Because ultimately, you have to settle down with everybody and be part of the family. Because that level of trust and commitment you have to demonstrate before people will listen to you and go along. Because people will listen to you because of role or position or other things only so far. And these organizations are large enough and are old enough and culturally set enough that they will absorb you and spit you out the other end if you don't do that. So in both places, both at the Jake and the agency, it took a long time to settle down and be part of the team, go native. And now the agency, it took me quite a while before, and it was rough. And that's part of the other thing, which is these jobs are not easy to get into because, I commute out every single week to Langley, away from my family. The language, the culture, the compartmentalization, the information, these are things that took a long, long time to build trust and be part of the family now. And now I feel I'm part of the family, right? Where, you're on the other end of jokes. You get fed the same stuff that everybody else does. But that is part and parcel. Now, with that position then, you have the being part of the family now, you can now start being critical and start being part of the solution to the problem in a way that an outsider isn't. So this idea of change agent, you have to turn it from change agent to we're all in this together, and I'm committed, and I'm here with everybody else every single day, cranking away at the problem, and I'm equally to blame for every problem that there is, but I'm also equally invested in fixing it. So to me, that was like a huge, huge thing that I had to set up from the very beginning of these of my tenure in either place.
If I could just add to that, having spent time with Nand and listening to his time there, and rather than being a change agent, what you really want to be is almost like a cultural ambassador, right? As a cultural ambassador, you're really getting to know the family as he's talking about, but then the other thing you're doing is as you take them back to your other culture. And one of the things I know early on that he did was, it's easier to show versus tell, right? So it's one thing to say, oh, the Valley's innovating really fast, it's really fast, we're not doing it. It's another thing to say, hey, let's all go to the Valley, let's spend 3 or 4 days, and let me set up meetings of my family there, right? That will talk to you about what they're doing in these relative spaces. And there's a level of trust. This isn't a curated, organized trip. This is a family trip. And you'll hear what they're doing, right? And in that process, they come back going like, oh, wow, right? That inspires them in a different way, right? And I think that's where this dual citizenship kind of is really important. And I think the mistake a lot of people make when they come into these roles, and again, I give Nand a lot of credit, is that they think they're the change agent. So do as I say because of my title, right? And then the way the antibodies work on that is we'll wait you out, right? And whereas if you come in and say, look, I'm a cultural ambassador, let me show you my world, just expose you to what's happening, and then they can kind of come to their conclusion as to like what we need to do to kind of play in this place.
And if I may add, thank you for that, Arun. I'll give you one example. The space that I have, I'm very lucky to have a fantastic office on the 7th floor of the agency. Just the design of how we redesigned that space was to basically, if you ever visit CIA, it's, looks like standard issue government agency with cubicles and small little offices and space. I was able to basically just tell them to clear cut the entire, just basically remove all the walls. We have an incredible window line, but the most important thing we did is that we have all of our meetings out in the open on couches. And I've had 30-plus year veterans of CIA walk out of meetings and say, this is the first time in my tenure I actually sat out in the open, because the whole space is all TS-SCI space. So the whole building is that way. And so this idea of sitting in a room inside of it, it just doesn't make sense. But culturally, we wanted to demonstrate that there was a different way of building community and using that space as a convening space. And just that culture of sitting out in the open, being able to talk about stuff. There's stuff where we need to go into conference rooms and things, we do it. But the default space now is that, because we have to demonstrate how the other family lives. This is how we do work here: open, collaborative, fast, whiteboards, other things. And it's funny, but it's taken, again, 1.5 years for people to now start thinking about this in a completely different way. But you have to show it, you have to demonstrate it, you have to live it, as opposed to just talking about it. And so the experiential side of this is incredibly, incredibly important. I'm probably the first one to walk into a director's mission update meeting in jeans the other day. I did actually just barely make my flight into DC that morning, red eye. But it's one of these things where they're starting to get used to this idea of not wearing a suit every day, not having to dress a certain way, not have to be a monoculture. Like, there are other ways where we can get work done in a completely different environment, different way of doing it. So it's hopefully get to write a book about it one day. Probably not.
Great question. Probably not. This is our final question. Please go ahead.
Thanks so much for leaving time for me here and for everything both of y'all have shared. Arun, I'm really excited to dig into this book. I'm very passionate about exactly this subject. It's right in line with what I consider my life's work. It seems to me we've talked a lot about the venture side and not a whole lot about the people and purpose side. And I'm really curious as to what's being done specifically to explicate methodologies that have the same level of kind of evidence-based rigor that our engineered solutions are demanding on the kind of social engineered side of that equation.
Yeah, it's a great question. And, if we talk about Noblereach and what we're doing, it really is building infrastructure to connect the innovation ecosystem, but also the talent ecosystem, right? And so touching on talent, I'll share a vignette, because a lot of what we're trying to do is how do we get our best and brightest thinking about solving these kinds of problems, right? I had 2 students, both CS majors, female CS young ladies at Stanford. One was selected to do Kessel Run, right? And she tells her friends she's going to go do Kessel Run, and her friends go like, "Why would you do government when you can do anything else out here in the valley?" There was a why question. Her other friend says, "I was selected, also CS major, but I'm going to go do Teach for America." And her friends go, "Wow, that's amazing. You're going to serve, you're going to give back, and then you can go do whatever you want." Right? And there's a paradoxical juxtaposition there that we've got right now societally, where going into government isn't viewed as service in the same way that is. And secondly, we tend to cop out by just saying, "Oh, it's about the money." That example right there is like the person going to Teach for America is earning half as much, right? So it's something deeper, right? It's about prestige, it's about respect. It's also being viewed as a career enhancer, right? So our theory on the case here is that, we need to rebuild that infrastructure, right, to get this talent going in. And we think it's very doable. And for some of the reasons that Nand said, especially right now, it's in the air. Students care, right? I was with Raphael Rafe, the former president at MIT, and he's like, "I don't think there's ever been a time where you can convince tech students like you can today to go do government service because of the impact, the mission, and what they're seeing around the world." Right? You heard climate, you heard national security, you see what's happening in healthcare. Food, it's like the kids see it. They've been shaped by this, right? And so I think part of the answer to your question is like, how do we rebuild that infrastructure to do that? And that's where we do think it's a collaborative call to service, right? It's how we interact with the universities. And, we're talking about this. Every university right now is struggling with this. The number of students going in versus the dollars they're taking from the federal government, it's upside down. They're not putting talent back into the system. And at the same time, agencies aren't showing up to recruit in a meaningful way. So we can't be surprised that students aren't finding these jobs. And if we send them to USA Jobs, right, that's like going to DOS, and these kids are living in an iPhone 15 world, right? So there's a lot of structural things that we can go fix. And so, we're trying to create that easy button. Because if you think about what the consulting, banking, tech firms do, is they make it easy. Hey, here's a flyer, here's a free dinner, come listen to us, here's an interview. Next thing you know, you've just been swept up and you're applying for a job that you never even wanted, but you get it, and then you do it, right? But you need to make that easy button for them, right? And I think that's part of the social engineering. The other piece, which is what we were talking about earlier, is we need to get more of these stories out there, right? Riff a little bit about government sells careers, but the students are looking for experiences, right? Government sells jobs, but the students are looking for mission. You can repackage the same thing. I'm a data analyst at NGA, and they'll be like, that's kind of interesting. But if you say, you're going to work on geospatial information to rebuild food networks in Ukraine, there's a line out the door of the very top students on these campuses wanting to participate in that. So how you package it is also important, right? And I think that's part of the theory of the case. It's like, let's get these 2-year kind of programs, 1 to 2 year programs where students are coming in, and we're not saying that you have to stay or sign up for a career in government service, but this is your opportunity to serve. And you can decide after that, and this is where private sector partners like JP Morgan and others that have been supporters of Noblereach come into play. Because when they're in our ecosystem, right, the banks, the consulting firms, the big tech firms, the students see that, if I do something like this, it matters to those firms, right? And then it is viewed as a career enhancer. I'm no longer taking this leap that, hey, I'm going to go into this agency, and I don't know in 2 or 3 years how any of the other employers are going to value that experience. We're de-risking that for them, right, in a meaningful way, and creating a cohort-based experience. And part of our long, theory of change, to your point, is that that's how you rebuild trust, right? People haven't gone into government. We shouldn't view that as a loss if they go back to the private sector, right? That's great. Now they know how they collaborate. We've got shared language. We've got more, we've got more dual citizens. Jen Easterly is very forward-thinking about this at CISA. She's like, I want students coming in here for only 2 or 3 years, and then I want to get them out. Is if they go to the big tech firms, I now have forward-deployed CISA folks, and they know how to interact with each other. So I think that's part of the social engineering piece. The other piece I'll just hit on real quick is, and Nand is, and I want to bring it up because Nand's a great example of this, is that we think there's a massive opportunity on second career folks. People that have had their first career as entrepreneurs, investors, builders, private sector folks, and then, we hit the stage of like, all right, what do I want to do with the next chapter? And as we're all living longer, we think that's a large opportunity. And someone mentioned Emerge. We've now got a cadre of 10 Emerge fellows. These are folks that have built companies in bio, cyber, AI that are helping now collaborate with DARPA and NSF researchers to help them think about how they build those companies and spin those out. So I think that's the theory of change.
I think Arun just called me an old dog, new tricks. But no, this is
That was unintended.
the nicest way possible. But it's right on. Actually, we should have actually recorded that, how you talked about mission and purpose. The only thing I'd add to that is that exact realization that Arun has mentioned is, like, it's new to us at CIA. And for instance, we now actually have a alumni association that the agency runs. I mean, like, it was surprising that we didn't have that before. But again, under Director Burns and the realization that this alumni network and the idea that you maybe come in for some time and you leave, but you'll come back potentially because you have sated your curiosity or whatever it was. And this idea of having experiential parts of your job and career, we're acknowledging that and we're leaning into it. So change is in the air. Everybody's learning this. Books like that and thoughts like that really are starting to permeate into the agency in places where you wouldn't have imagined before. So it's all goodness. It's just a question of now how to start, again, scaling it and making it faster. So,
Amazing. Thank you both.
thank you.
Great way to conclude the conversation, truly. Thank you so much for your time, and a reminder that the book is next door. So I will turn it over to Tim. Thank you so much, Nan.
Wonderful.
and
Thank
Arun.
you. Thank
You.
you.